Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Saudi Arabia after the 1 week break. A 1 week break that I actually didn't realise we were going to have. We should be in for a good run though now after we've had obviously the Christmas break, a couple of events and then a 1 week break. So we should have plenty of events in a row back to back. And yeah, looking forward to that run. It's always a big run after the Christmas break and the first break into the new year as well. But like I said, we're in UFC Saudi Arabia. It's an absolutely stacked fight night card in my opinion. Great main event, great co-main event. And like I say, I think the majority of the fights on the card are going to be absolutely fire. I think we're in for a really, really good night. And of course, from a UK and Europe perspective, I haven't checked the start times, but usually with these fight nights in Saudi Arabia and the Abu Dhabi cards, the Dubai cards, they're normally really good times for us as well. So I'm expecting from a UK perspective it to be an afternoon card, which again is fantastic, and that's what we love over here rather than having to stay up till 6-7 a.m. in the morning. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as usual, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, which in Saudi Arabia I'm sure you're going to want to, especially with a card like this, make sure you get onto MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that likes the written breakdowns and the explanation of why we're recommending certain bets. We've got that section for you. If you're somebody that just wants to follow the official bets of the handicapper, which of course is myself, we've got a section for you as well. And if you're a fun gambler that just likes the long shot parlays, or maybe you want to create your own parlay, we've got a fun gambler section with all that available too. And as always, every single subscription is complete with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software. We don't separate that from any other package. You get absolutely everything in every single subscription package. You just need to choose how long you want that subscription for, whether it's just one event with a next event subscription, whether it's monthly, you want it month by month, that's $9.99, or whether you want to take advantage of our annual subscription for the full 12 months, which is just $99. Everything you could possibly need is on MMA Play 365 from a betting perspective for every UFC event, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promotion out the way, let's get into breaking some fights down. And as always, we start in the main event. We've got a phenomenal middleweight main event here. We've got Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov. I love the fact that this is a main event. I love the fact that this is 5 rounds as well. And it's a really intriguing fight from the Adesanya perspective, because this is the first time in almost 6 years and in 12 UFC fights that Israel Adesanya is not fighting for some form of UFC belt, whether that's an interim belt, whether that's the middleweight belt, whether that's the light heavyweight belt, which of course he stepped up to fight Jan Blachowicz a few years ago. So this is the first time that Israel Adesanya is fighting in a fight that doesn't have a belt at stake, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he approaches the fight. But for me, like, the biggest thing with Adesanya is the main question you've got to ask is Israel Adesanya declined? Is he on a harsh decline? Now, I'm not saying that he has to be on a harsh decline for Nassourdine Imavov to beat him. Like, Imavov, I think, is going to be competitive in this fight, but I do think it's an important point to mention. Now, from my perspective, I don't see the harsh decline. At the same time, we're not going to get prime champion Israel Adesanya either, but from a decline perspective, I don't think he's on a harsh decline. I also don't think that, like I've just said, we're not in prime Israel Adesanya champion territory anymore. So, in my opinion, the best 2 fighters in the division are obviously Dricus du Plessis, who is the current champion, and Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I don't think Adesanya would become that competitive with them anymore, that he would beat them more often than he loses, if that makes sense. But Nassourdine Imavov is not Dricus du Plessis, he's not Khamzat Chimaev, and he's not in that elite category of the division. So it's not only a step down from the type of fight Israel Adesanya usually fights in, but it's also a step down in competition, in my opinion, as well. Like, you look at the opponents that Israel Adesanya's lost to in the UFC. He's lost to, of course, Dricus du Plessis, current champion. He lost to Sean Strickland. I kind of feel like that's still an anomaly result, though, but he lost the fight to Sean Strickland, who obviously became the champion, so technically a former champion. And then he lost to Alex Pereira, who's a former champion in two weight classes. But to be fair to Adesanya, he instantly rematched Pereira after that first loss and then knocked him out in that second fight, in that rematch in the UFC. And then the Jan Blachowicz fight, again, I kind of don't really count that or put too much stock into that either, because he stepped up in weight, completely different weight category against a huge guy in the weight class above. So, physically he was massively outmatched in that fight. So with Israel Adesanya, the fighters that he's losing to are just at the absolute top of the sport, whereas Nassourdine Imavov's not. And that's why the question of, is Israel Adesanya on a harsh decline, really important, because I think that if he's not on a harsh decline, then it's going to be, like I say, I think the fight's going to be somewhat competitive anyway, but I think Israel Adesanya is just going to be too good for Imavov. And again, that's the main question. Is he declined? The flip side to this is, I kind of feel that we can't be 100% sure about the answer to that question until we've seen this fight, because he might go into this fight and not look anything like what he's fought previously, and he might get beat by Imavov, and Imavov might look really good against him, and then that's then the question answered definitively, is Adesanya declined? But from a pre-fight perspective, whether you're betting this fight, predicting this fight, or just giving your thoughts, there's absolutely, in my opinion, nothing that I have seen right now up until this point to say that Israel Adesanya is going to be an absolute shadow of his former self and he's not going to be able to beat somebody like Imavov. I haven't seen that yet. I'm not saying it can't happen, but as of right now, until we see this fight, we can only analyse the footage that we have before the fight, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Now, in regards to how this fight plays out, I am wondering if Imavov comes in here with a wrestling strategy, a wrestling game plan, because look, Adesanya is difficult to take down and is difficult to keep down, but like Dricus du Plessis showed in their title fight, if you keep on it, if you keep at it, I wouldn't say Dricus was relentless with it, but you can eventually get at Adesanya if you keep to your game plan of wrestling and grappling. The thing is, I think Dricus du Plessis is a much better wrestler and grappler than Imavov. So this is why, again, I am wondering if Imavov does come in with a wrestling game plan just to break things up a little bit, but I can't see the fight being played out and finished and the result of the fight being based on wrestling and grappling. I think the result of the fight's going to be won and lost in regards to the striking. They're both predominant strikers. It's just, I think Imavov could potentially try and break things up a little bit, but also when he starts wrestling and grappling, I think it hits his cardio a little bit more than what it does striking. So again, over 5 rounds, I think if this was a 3-round fight, I think Imavov would have a much better chance of beating Adesanya, but I think the 5 rounds favours Adesanya. And then when you look at the quality of striking, although Imavov is a quality striker as well, I think Israel Adesanya is still a level above. I expect him to be a little bit sharper, a little bit faster. I expect his movement to be better. I expect his cardio to be better. And when it comes to the volume, I think Adesanya is going to be up there. I think he's going to make Imavov miss a little bit. And then, like I say, the longer the fight goes on, unless Imavov can really start hitting Adesanya hard and busting him up and draining the gas tank of Adesanya that way, which we have seen before, then I think that's the way Imavov can win. But he's got to hit Adesanya a lot here and hit him with hard shots. And I just don't know whether the volume and the power behind the volume and then the cardio to keep up with the power strikes as well is going to be all on point for Imavov and all come together enough to be able to put it on Adesanya in a big way. So yeah, look, I'm still waiting to see that big performance from Imavov at this level where he just absolutely cruises and whitewashes somebody to the point where we're thinking, right, he can absolutely come out there and smoke somebody like Adesanya, and I just don't think he's there yet. Like, look at the Cannonier fight. That was a somewhat controversial stoppage according to some MMA fans, some UFC fans, but from the scorecard perspective, Imavov was not up against Cannonier before that finish. So, Imavov could have ended up winning the last 2 rounds and potentially winning the fight, but he wasn't up on the scorecards. And you look at Israel Adesanya's fight with Cannonier. I know it was, quite underwhelming, but it was clear, it was decisive. And yeah, look, I just don't think Imavov is at that stage yet where he can beat a world-class version of Israel Adesanya. So for those reasons, I'm picking Israel Adesanya to win this fight. And in the next fight, this has got to be one of my favourite fights on the entire card. It's unbelievable matchmaking, perfect matchmaking. It's a perfect fight for both fighters. The only knock that I'm going to give this co-main event is that it's not one of these featured 5-round co-main events. It would have been unbelievable if this was 5 rounds as well. So unfortunately, we only have 3 rounds of it, which speaks volumes to how good this fight actually is. We've got Shara Bullet Magomedov versus Michael Venom Page. And like I say, it's just unbelievable matchmaking. I can't stress that enough because both fighters just, I wouldn't say hate the wrestling and grappling, but both fighters are predominant strikers. It really irritates them, I think, when they're getting disrupted by opponents that are wanting to try and take them down. They want to stay on the feet, showcase their skills, be elusive, land on their opponents. They're both absolutely high-level elite strikers, and they're going to get the absolute fight that they both want. Like, I'd be shocked to see wrestling and grappling in this fight. And if you ask me which one was more likely to wrestle and grapple, I would probably say Michael Venom Page. I'd probably say MVP, but I just don't see it. I don't see a single takedown being shot in this fight. And if it does, then I'm going to be shocked. And even if there is some takedowns, I don't see the result on this fight being based from the wrestling and grappling, just like what I've said with Adesanya and Imavov. But I think I stress it even stronger than the Adesanya and Imavov fight. Like, these two fighters, I just don't think we even see a takedown. So the striking's going to be phenomenal. The one thing that we just have to talk about off the bat as well is the weight class. So this is MVP stepping up in weight, but I don't think it's going to be of a detriment to him. I think if he was fighting a wrestler and grappler, then yeah, of course it would be a big risk. But actually, because of how this fight should play out in regards to the striking, I think Venom Page may be carrying the lesser weight, being a little bit quicker and a little bit faster in regards to the moving and the striking. Because he's carrying less weight, I think probably suits him better because of the stylistic type of fight that we're expecting here. Like I say, if there was wrestling and grappling, then yeah, I don't think it should be a smart move for Page. And I think if Magomedov was a wrestler and a grappler, there's no way Page would have, come up in weight to fight him, because it's just been a bad move. But like I say, with the striking, it's going to be the lighter fighter that's going to be quicker on the feet, which again, in a striking fight, does favour that type of fighter, which is MVP. Now, in regards to the size of these guys, like Shara Bullet's a tall guy, he's long, he fights long as well, so he's normally got the height, reach advantage, and just ultimately being the bigger guy. But Michael Venom Page matches that completely. And in fact, even MVP coming up in weight is going to be taller, he's going to be longer, he's got a 1-inch height advantage, which is negligible. That's probably not going to make too much of a difference. But the stat that is very surprising is that MVP is going to have a 6-inch reach advantage over Shara Bullet, and then the leg reach, the stats aren't really there for the leg reach, at least not what I can see. But from the eye, just from eyeing it out, MVP's got long legs as well, so MVP might actually be able to strike from the outside here, which, again, I think is going to throw Shara Bullet off his game a little bit. Shara Bullet is normally the fighter that tries to stay on the outside, striking in, and when his opponent gets close, he gets that distance again and goes again. But Shara Bullet is going to have moments in this fight where he's got to close the distance on MVP, which he's not really used to doing. And then closing the distance when you're not really used to doing it against someone like MVP, I think is going to be a nightmare with how MVP moves. Is so weird and unorthodox with his striking. And I think from a striking perspective, the better quality technical striking is going to come from MVP as well. And then if he's really difficult to hit, and if he's, bigger than Shara Bullet, which Shara Bullet's not really used to, then that's going to cause additional problems. And then when Shara Bullet's closing the distance, he's going to be closing the distance, if he's successful, into more of a boxing range. And again, that's not his predominant striking style. He likes to, throw his strikes on the outside, big, kicks, long kicks, punches, straight punches. So I think it's going to be a very different fight for Shara Bullet to what he's used to. I think that he's going to have not difficulties, but it's going to be an unfamiliar territory fighting someone that he's not taller than and longer than. And then to add to all that, he's got the ability, the elite striking skill set of Venom Page to deal with. Like, how often is he going to be able to crack Venom Page? Like, if this is a volume count over 3 rounds, I think Page just... I think not many fighters are going to be able to stand 15 minutes with Michael Venom Page without, like, look at the Ian Gary fight. Man, Gary needed that wrestling and grappling against Page. And Gary's a good striker in his own right, but MVP was, once he got his reads down, he was absolutely lighting him up. Kevin Holland is a fighter that, you know, has been done by the wrestling and grappling himself, but he needed to wrestle and grapple against Michael Venom Page, and he was tall and long as well. Kevin Holland, also a good striker, unorthodox striker, and Page just absolutely put on a masterclass against him. And I just think that, look, although Magomedov, in my opinion, is a better striker than Kevin Holland, and he's a better striker than Ian Gary, the point is Venom Page is almost like a new version of, I wouldn't say new because he's not like a mid-20-year-old guy, but new to the UFC. He's a newer version of what Wonderboy was. He's just a difficult puzzle to solve on the feet, and I'm just not sure if Magomedov is going to be able to solve that puzzle quick enough to be able to do Page over 3 rounds. And then when you look at the cardio, when things aren't going well for Shara Bullet, he can slow down a bit. He can have some cardio issues where MVP will go for 3 rounds, no problem as well. So I think there's a lot of upside to Page. The only downside is the weight, but I kind of feel, like I've already said, with the stylistic matchup, the weight is a pretty negligible, characteristic of this fight. I don't think the Shara Bullet being the bigger fighter in there is going to play too much of a factor, apart from maybe punch power if he does land a hard punch that knocks Page out. Outside of that, I think it's a good fight for MVP. So for those reasons, I'm picking Michael Venom Page to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the big boys. We've got Sergei Pavlovich versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik in the heavyweight division. And I don't see this going 3 rounds. I think at some point, one of these fighters is going to land something on the other and flatten them. So it's just which fighter's going to do that now. It's an interesting one because Jairzinho Rozenstruik, for me, is the better technical striker. He's the one with the kickboxing background. I think he's the one that just puts things together a little bit better from a technical perspective. But with Pavlovich, he's just an absolute monster of a man, of a frame. He's got power in abundance. Although Jairzinho Rozenstruik is one of the hardest hitters in the division, I think Pavlovich is even harder. So I think from Rozenstruik's perspective, he's got to be very careful going in here. And I actually think the technical advantage aspect of Rozenstruik is probably going to be his downfall here, because when Rozenstruik's trying to be technical, he's trying to land on him, just break him down a little bit. Rozenstruik won't go in at 1,000,000 miles an hour and look to just knock him out in one punch. I think Rozenstruik is going to try and sit, feed his way into the fight, find his way in, try to make the relevant reads, try to make Pavlovich miss on his punches. And I think whilst he's trying to be too coy and too smart and too technical, I think Pavlovich is going to find a way in and just land something and knock him out. So I think that, look, Rozenstruik, if this is a flip side to this and Pavlovich comes in a little bit reckless and Rozenstruik uses that technical striking to sort of find that gap and find that hole as Pavlovich is coming in looking for a big punch and knocks him out, then I'm not going to be shocked with that either. And also, just on a side note, Jairzinho Rozenstruik fights, Jairzinho Rozenstruik in general has always been a fighter that I've kind of got wrong over the years. Like, I'm more than happy to scream about the fighters that I've been absolutely right on and, hit so many times in the UFC. But with Rozenstruik is one of these fighters that I'm not really sure if I've ever actually won a bet on him, and I've bet on his fights quite a few times. I bet on him, I bet against him. In fact, I'll just have a quick look to see where I'm at with that. So this is just off the top of my head because I'm not bringing up my Bet MMA page and going back this far in historical data, but I can normally remember which fights I've been on and which fights I've not. So I think the Junior Albini fight, I wasn't on that fight. I wasn't on the Alan Crowder fight either. I don't think I had money on Andrei Arlovsky or Overeem or Ngannou. So I think it pretty much started from the Junior Dos Santos fight. So I had money on Jairzinho Rozenstruik to beat JDS, and he did. He knocked him out, but JDS was actually looking really good until that knockout and probably on his way to winning the fight. So although I won the bet, probably not the best bet. Then the Cyril Gane fight, I don't think I was on that. Augusto Sakai, I might have bet Augusto Sakai in that fight. I can't really remember. I bet Curtis Blades in the Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Blades fight. Obviously, I won that because Blades won. I bet on Rozenstruik against Volkov, and he lost that. So actually, it's, the Gaziev fight, I bet Gaziev, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik won. I bet Tuivasa against Rozenstruik. That was a lost bet as well. So I'm probably actually around close to 50-50, looking at it. So maybe it's not as bad as what I thought. But yeah, going back to this fight, I just feel that, like I say, the technique of Jairzinho Rozenstruik's great, but I think the power and how Pavlovich bullies his opponents and how imposing he is inside the cage, the forward pressure. I just think if you can get Jairzinho Rozenstruik moving backwards or covering up or a little bit concerned with the barrage of attacks and the power coming at him, I think eventually he finds a home for one of the punches that either knocks Jairzinho Rozenstruik out, or maybe it's one of those punches that just lands and then that starts the end of the fight where Rozenstruik, stunned, moves back to the cage and can't really recover in time before Pavlovich, finds another punch that ends up dropping him. So yeah, look, I think it's a really good fight. It's going to be a fight that's won and lost on the feet. Someone, in my opinion, is going to get knocked out and flattened here. I think that fight is going to be Rozenstruik. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sergei Pavlovich to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of two fights that have really intrigued me with the betting action that I've seen so far. And this is Said Nurmagomedov versus Vinicius Oliveira. Now, Vinicius Oliveira seems to be the darling at the minute of the hardcore UFC fan base. Everybody loves Lockdog, big knockout in his UFC debut, and then he comes in against Ricky Simone and absolutely whitewashes Simone, and everybody loves Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira. And look, from an entertainment perspective, I absolutely agree. Like, how could you not like Vinicius Oliveira? How could you not like watching him? But I kind of feel that, before I say what I was about to say, the reason why it's intriguing to me is because I've not seen a single Said Nurmagomedov bet. I've not seen anybody post anything about Said to this point, and admittedly I'm not on X or formerly Twitter as much as what I used to be, but I'm definitely seeing more action coming in towards Oliveira than I am to Said, and it surprises me quite a bit, to be honest, because look, yes, the Ricky Simone fight was a really good win for Oliveira, but that was just a completely different fight and fighter as well. So Simone is a fighter that probably is on a decline right now, but regardless of that, it's a completely different style to Said Nurmagomedov. For those that maybe are new to the UFC and haven't seen too much of Said Nurmagomedov, he's not your typical Dagestani Russian wrestler grappler. He can wrestle, he can grapple, and he's actually got really nasty front chokes as well if you try shooting in on him. But predominantly, Said Nurmagomedov's style is kickboxing, and he's a very, very good striker for MMA. And with Vinicius Oliveira, although Oliveira's got a big record, I think he's actually got more fights than Said, or it might be very even, but from an experience perspective, from an overall record, it's very close. But Said Nurmagomedov has got the UFC experience here, the high-level competition experience over Vinicius Oliveira. And I'm not taking anything away from Oliveira. I think he's going to be dangerous in this fight. I think he's going to be competitive as well. But again, just like I mentioned with Israel Adesanya at the start of the breakdown, at the start of the podcast, I feel that Said Nurmagomedov, from a striking perspective, is just going to be a level above from a technical standpoint. Like, when Vinicius Oliveira is coming in aggressive, he's going to come in hard, he's going to try and knock him out. We know the entertaining style of Oliveira now, and he's a very good striker in his own right, but I think Said Nurmagomedov is just very difficult to hit. He makes his opponents miss, and I just think that Oliveira is going to come into this fight, come out really hard, try and get Said Nurmagomedov out there. Maybe he lands a couple of good shots on him and Said suddenly gets some respect for him, but I think that would only help Said anyway. I think if he gets that respect early, it's going to switch him on. He's going to be in and out the pocket. He's going to be be moving really well inside the pocket, sliding in, sliding out, trying to avoid the heavy strikes from Oliveira, and then just slowly start to pick at Vinicius Oliveira the longer the fight goes on, rack up the volume, again, just start making things quite frustrating for Oliveira. And I think at some point, if Oliveira is missing, if he does get frustrated, and if Saeed just isn't there to be hit as much as what he wants to hit him, I think maybe, he starts slowing down the longer the fight goes on, and then at that point, Saeed's going to be able to pick up the pace and pick up the volume and just slowly start to take the fight away from Oliveira. I'm kind of seeing this style of fight playing out. Maybe Oliveira can't hit Saeed Nurmagomedov as much as what he wants. Maybe he shoots him for a takedown. But man, you've got to be so careful shooting in against Saeed. Like, the dude is legitimately got nasty front chokes, and if he locks one up, man, I don't think I've seen anybody get out of one. Even like Kakramonov, who in my opinion was absolute, well, it's not an opinion, he was absolutely smoking Saeed Nurmagomedov from a wrestling and grappling perspective. But the one moment Saeed got to lock up his neck, bang, it's over. Upset, I wouldn't say it's an upset victory, but definitely a comeback victory from how the fight was playing out. So I think Saeed Nurmagomedov is very dangerous to shoot on. So if Oliveira does recognise that and stay standing, stay striking, I think Saeed's just a better quality striker. And again, from a competition perspective, the only two losses that Saeed Nurmagomedov's got in the UFC was the Jonathan Martinez fight, which arguably he could have won. And again, I wouldn't say it was a massively controversial decision, but on a different night, the judges could have scored that fight to Saeed. And Jonathan Martinez is a high-level striker. Then you look at the other loss, Raoni Barcelos. Now, that's not the Raoni Barcelos that we saw, a couple of weeks ago, even though that's still a very good version of him. This was a prime Raoni Barcelos, where this was an absolutely phenomenal matchup at the time. And again, I thought Saeed Nurmagomedov won that fight. Every time I watch that fight back, I think that he won that fight. But again, I wouldn't say it's highly controversial or a robbery or anything like that. Just on a different night, different judges, he might have got that fight as well. And they're the only two fighters that he's lost against. And I just don't think that Vinicius Oliveira is the Jonathan Martinez that fought Saeed Nurmagomedov, nor the Raoni Barcelos that fought Nurmagomedov. And those guys had to fight the fight of their life to edge those victories against Saeed. And I just don't think Oliveira's there quite yet. I still think there's a little bit of a level difference between these two guys. And for those reasons, I'm picking Saeed Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Muhammad Naimov versus Kaan Ofli. I think this is going to be fun as well. Look, I said this right at the start of the podcast. Every single fight I actually think is just a really good fight. I'm really looking forward to Saturday afternoon or evening or night, depending on what time the event's on. But look, from Kaan Ofli's perspective, I lost a bet on Kaan Ofli in his, I want to say UFC debut. It was the Ultimate Fighter finale. I don't think we saw the best version of Ofli, but I also think that he was just outmatched by his opponent anyway. And if they rematched it, we probably see the same type of fight and, a similar result of the fight just because of the stylistic differences. So I do actually think there's a good fighter in Kaan Ofli. I do think that the striking is a work in progress, but it's efficient and effective for what he wants to do, which is get the takedown, get his opponent and get the fight down to the mat. So, and then his grappling, I think, is good as well. I think Kaan Ofli can still win fights in the UFC, but I don't think he's been given an easy an actual UFC debut here against Muhammad Naimov. Now, Naimov, last time out, of course, he lost on the debut of Felipe Lima. Now, I actually bet Felipe Lima as the underdog in that fight to beat Naimov, and that fight, Naimov was he started well, he was looking good, and then Felipe Lima got the finish late in the fight where he might have gone on to lose that fight on the scorecards. But I'm telling you, Felipe Lima's a good fighter, and in his next fight in the UFC, he goes against Miles Johns and beats Miles Johns unanimously as well. And look, I've been quite critical of Miles Johns in previous podcasts and previous breakdowns, but Miles Johns is a solidified UFC caliber fighter. And to come into the UFC and beat Muhammad Naimov on short notice up a weight class and then beat Miles Johns, it shows you that Felipe Lima is a good fighter. So that loss that Naimov took to him, again, potential comeback victory, but also he's losing to a fighter that, again, he could have potentially been beaten, but a fighter that's better than Kaan Ofli. So I think with Kaan Ofli, he's going to have difficulties from a physical perspective in this fight. I think Naimov's going to be bigger, he's going to be stronger. I think the way Kaan Ofli fights, looking for the takedowns, getting the fights down to the mat, I think he's going to have a difficult time, moving Naimov about. And if he does take him down, I just don't think he's going to be able to secure the top control position really quickly. So Naimov will probably get back up to his feet. And then if we are seeing wrestling and grappling throughout the fight, I think that Naimov's the more likely successor in this type of fight because he's bigger, because he's stronger. I think he can get Ofli down. I think he could keep Ofli down as well. Naimov's got some good control topside. And then from a striking perspective, look, I don't think neither of these guys hit like an elite technical striking category, but they're both very similar. They both throw heavy hammers effectively and efficiently to close the distance and again to try and get a hold of their opponent. So they're very similar stylistically. It's just I think Muhammad Naimov is bigger, he's stronger, and he's going to be more physical, and I think that's going to matter on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Muhammad Naimov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're back in the heavyweight division. We've got Shamil Gaziev versus Thomas Petersen. Now, one of these fighters I'm actually still quite high on, and one of these fighters I'm not so much. The fighter that I'm still quite high on is Gaziev. And the reason why I say I'm still quite high on him is because I do think that he took that Rozenstruik fight way too early. Everything was just off about that fight. I actually lost a bet on Gaziev. It's hindsight's 2020, and looking at that fight, it was a terrible bet. But pre-fight, he was a favourite, and other people had the same thoughts I did. But I actually think that the best thing that Gaziev could have done is lose that fight to Rozenstruik in the way that he lost it as well, because it instantly showed him that he's took things a little bit too far, whilst also showing him that at this level he's got things to work on. And then he comes back and fights Dontel Mays, which is a big step down in competition considering he just fought a 5-round a 5-round main event against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. It was a big step down in competition, but one that he went into and absolutely performed exactly how he needed to coming off that loss. So I think that the UFC brought in Gaziev, he had a good debut, then they put him into the 5-round main event against a fighter who was a ranked fighter, probably pushed him a little bit too much, a little bit too soon, but now he can start again, and I think this is the next step. So I think the Dontel Mays win was the perfect matchup considering he's coming off that Jairzinho Rozenstruik loss, and then I think Thomas Petersen is just the next step in the process of building Gaziev up in the division. And I think that, look, Petersen from a wrestling perspective, he's got some decent wrestling, but the thing is with Gaziev, he's so big, he's so strong, and he can wrestle himself. It's very similar to what I've just spoken about with Muhammad Naimov and Kaan Ofli. I think that Thomas Petersen could potentially try and wrestle Gaziev, but look, if he gets Gaziev down, am I convinced Gaziev gets back up to his feet? I just don't know. I would imagine he could, just because of the strength, even if he just uses pure strength to explode back up to his feet. But if Petersen is coming in on a single leg takedown, looking to take Gaziev down, I just think Gaziev just uses his strength, stuffs the head, reverses position, and probably gets a takedown on Petersen. And if there is no takedown there, Petersen is so hittable. He doesn't really move his head off the center line too much. You look at Petersen's fight against Jamal Pogues, Jamal Pogues had Petersen all bust up, and I think Gaziev's a better quality striker than Pogues, who we will talk about a little bit later as well, by the way. And I think that Gaziev hits a lot harder than Pogues as well. So if Pogues is piecing Petersen up like that, I think on the feet Gaziev could do the same. The difference is, I think if Gaziev starts to do the same, I think Gaziev knocks Petersen out because he's got real power. So I'm not sure how much of a factor the wrestling and grappling will be in this fight where it's won and lost, because both fighters' cardios are a little bit, I won't say suspect, but it's like normal cardio you would expect from, heavyweight wrestlers. Being a heavyweight and wrestling, it's not really like hand in hand when it comes to cardio. So I think both fighters have got their issues with their own style and the cardio, but on the feet, I think that's where Gaziev could really get at Petersen and hurt him. And I do think that, I'm not sure how many takedowns Petersen gets, so I do think we're going to see extended periods of time striking here, and I just see Gaziev landing something that, again, like I said with Pavlovich and Rozenstruik, just landing something that lands clean and either knocking him clean out or just starting the beginning of the end of the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Shamil Gaziev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Terrance McKinney versus Damir Hadzovic. So a really interesting fight. I kind of feel like it's a fight that the UFC have potentially made to get Terrance McKinney back in the win column. I know McKinney is really inconsistent, and there's a pattern to it as well. So the pattern to the inconsistency is he either faces fighters that he absolutely should be beating or fighters that absolutely should be beating him. And to be fair, when I say inconsistency, he's actually consistent with that type of pattern, in my opinion. So, the pattern's my opinion. In regards to, like I say, the consistency in it, he's beating the fighters that he should be beating and not beating the fighters that he shouldn't be beating. So, in regards to the record itself from wins and losses, that's where it's inconsistent, because he struggles to put the big win streaks together, because once he's beaten a couple of fighters that he should be beating, he then gets matched up against a fighter that's a step up in competition, and that's normally where he struggles. Now with Damir Hadzovic, I think this is a really good fight for him. Look, Hadzovic hasn't fought since 2022. It was the fight against Mark Diakiese where he was completely dominated in London, and that's 3 years ago. I think Hadzovic is like 38 now as well, so I just don't know how much more Hadzovic has got to give against certain opponents. Now, this could have been a different type of opponent where, it's a similar age, a similar record to Hadzovic, and somebody that, he could be absolutely competitive with, but I think with McKinney, although I do expect Hadzovic to be somewhat competitive here, but I think with McKinney, with how fast he comes out, with how hard he comes out, at the start, Hadzovic might be like, okay, I like this, because Hadjovic's background is within striking. That's where he prefers to fight. But the thing is, McKinney's knocked out better strikers, in my opinion, than Hadzovic, fighters that are more dangerous than Hadzovic. So when McKinney's coming forwards, I think McKinney's going to have a lot of success in regards to his speed and just being like completely overwhelming. Like, I don't think Hadzovic will have faced a fighter that comes out as fast and hard as what McKinney does. And of course, that's to McKinney's detriment in some other fights, because when McKinney can't get that opponent out in round one, then he starts slowing down significantly. But the thing is with McKinney, I kind of feel like he's got a couple of paths to victory, even early in this fight. Either he can come forwards, land hard on Hadzovic and knock him out. I think that's a realistic, viable path to victory. And then the other side is maybe he comes out, throws a few hard punches, gets the arms and the guard raised high of Hadzovic, and then shoots down and takes him down. Like Hadzovic has, for a long time now had his weaknesses within his game, within the wrestling and grappling, when he's facing another good wrestler and grappler. Like, for example, Mark Diakiese in his last fight took him down 8 times. It was a comfortable victory for Diakiese. I think Terrance McKinney can level change at the hips and take Hadzovic down. I think on the floor, McKinney could take a back and choke him out, maybe land some ground and pound. I think that where Hadjovic's weaknesses within his game is where Terrance McKinney is very strong. But then where Hadzovic is strong, McKinney's got like ridiculous speed and power and, the ability to put your lights out as well. And he's younger and, a lot fresher in regards to his MMA career. I just think it's a problem fight for Hadzovic. I'm not sure if he deals with that storm that McKinney's going to come in with, if it's a striking storm, and if it's not, I just don't think Hadzovic is going to be able to stop the takedowns and prevent McKinney from potentially taking his back, choking him, or landing ground and pound either. So I think it's a really good fight for Terrance McKinney to get back in the win column. I think it's a bad stylistic fight for Hadzovic and where he is in his career as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Terrance McKinney to win this fight. And in the next fight, I mentioned earlier with the Said Nurmagomedov and Vinicius Oliveira fight that was 1 out of 2 really intriguing fights from an action perspective of what we've seen from, people with the betting tickets. This is number 2 out of the 2 fights, but it's probably the most intriguing, and I'll explain why very shortly. But we've got Firas Ziam versus Mike Davis. Now, I didn't think this fight was going to be that intriguing from a betting perspective when I saw both fighters, match up against each other when the fight was announced. But actually, if you've been tracking this fight from the opener, it's very, very interesting. So Firas Ziam opened at around plus 220 with Mike Davis around minus 275. and all the money came in on Ziam. So much so, he went from a plus 220 underdog to around a plus 110 underdog, and then it's fluctuating a little bit from here. So it dropped down from plus 220 to plus 110, and then Ziam went up to like plus 120 again when a little bit of money came back in on Mike Davis. But then I'm looking this morning, and some more money's come back in on Ziam, pushed him back down to plus 110. Really interesting, and I think the line's probably settled where it's going to settle now. I was wondering whether Ziam would flip into a favourite, which would be some shit, man, considering that Ziam opened up at plus 220. If he was able to flip into a favourite, that would be some big line movement. So look, from a betting perspective, I don't think there's a single Mike Davis ticket in the house, or at least there wasn't until maybe 24 hours ago. So yeah, look, very interesting straight off the bat. Now, when you look at the stylistic fight, I think that the reason Ziam's been bet down is because people saw that plus 220 and thought the line's just completely off. And look, if you've got Ziam at plus 220, plus 200, plus 190, plus 180, maybe even like plus 150, like you've done your job, you've beaten the line movement, and that's what you're supposed to do if you like the Firas Ziam side. But I kind of think that, look, I'm more on the Davis side here, so I'm going against the grain again. And I think that Mike Davis poses a lot of problems for Firas Ziam, and problems that maybe Ziam hasn't faced to this date. And I actually want to talk about Ziam's previous fights in the UFC. Like, you look at last time out, this was a phenomenal fight against Matt Frevola. Matt Frevola was shooting takedowns at Ziam. He was trying to knock Ziam out. Ziam used, his reach, his length, fighting on the outside to really start racking up volume, making Matt Frevola miss, which he did a lot. But then Ziam actually got 4 takedowns as well on Matt Frevola, who's the wrestler and grappler. So from that fight perspective, I can absolutely understand why everybody just wants to be on the Firas Ziam side at plus money, especially up at like plus 200, plus 220. So I completely and utterly get that. It was a really good fight for Firas Ziam. But the issue is Matt Frevola is not Mike Davis. Like, if Matt Frevola fought Mike Davis, I think Mike Davis would cruise in that fight as well. But then the other fights that Firas Ziam has won, look, Claudio Puelles, that was a split decision win. Puelles took him down 7 times. That's a concern here. I know Matt Frevola couldn't really take him down, but look, Frevola he wasn't really setting his takedowns up with his strikes really well, and he was missing on a lot of his strikes and trying to force things and rush things, and I just didn't think it played out as much as good as what it could have done for Frevola. But Puelles did manage to get Firas Ziam down, and yeah, Ziam won the fight. Puelles landed 4 strikes in 3 rounds to Firas Ziam's 31, so from a striking perspective, Ziam did deserve to win that fight, but it's still a little bit of a red flag being taken down 7 times, especially when Mike Davis, in my opinion, is a better wrestler and a much heavier topside grappler than Claudio Puelles. Then you look at Ziam's next fight. He won this again against Jai Herbert. Now, this was a close fight, 2 tall, long strikers, and it was very, strike for strike, I strike, you strike, but then Firas Ziam just did edge out the majority of the rounds and won. Then the Michael Figlak fight. Again, Figlak came in, I'm sure he was a heavy favourite against Ziam, and Ziam managed to take Figlak down 3 times. But look, Figlak's not in the UFC anymore. Then the win after that for Firas Ziam was Luigi Vendramini, not in the UFC anymore. Jamie Malarkey, I actually think that Jamie Malarkey should have gotten the nod in that fight. I think a lot of people did as well. But again, Jamie Malarkey took him down 5 times, and at the time, Jamie Malarkey was this wild, entertaining striker, but he managed to get Ziam down. So there's a pattern here. There's a pattern of, look, I think that Mike Davis, fairly, is probably the best fighter that Firas Ziam has fought. I mean, even the 2 losses, Ziam lost against Terrance McKinney and he lost against Don Madge. I think Mike Davis is better than both of them. So I can understand why people have bet Firas Ziam down, but I think Mike Davis is the better fighter. Mike Davis has also got a really good wrestling game that I think he's going to be able to capitalise on where someone like Matt Frevola couldn't do. And the reason why I think Davis will capitalise on that where Frevola couldn't is because Mike Davis is a better striker, so he's got real good striking. He's a unit of a man as well, so he's really strong. And that's the other thing, like, Ziam got past any physical advances that Matt Frevola made against him, but I think Mike Davis is more physical and is stronger. He's a big fighter for the division. So I think if he's getting a hold of Ziam in the clinch position, Ziam's going down. And I think from a striking perspective, Mike Davis can hang with Ziam as well. Again, they strike a little bit differently. Ziam is taller, longer in regards to, fighting long and firing the straight punches, whereas Mike Davis will mix in hooks and shots to the body and will just try to be more imposing and moving the opponent backwards. So I think from a striking perspective, it's relatively close, but I think that Mike Davis has beaten fighters and competed better with fighters that are better strikers than Ziam. But then when the wrestling and grappling gets going, I just don't think Ziam's going to be able to stand up like he's done against previous fighters. I think when Davis takes him down, Davis is very heavy topside and he does a good job of being a heavy blanket and then transitioning to positions where he can look for submission attempts as well. So I just think Davis has got a good fight here stylistically, and I do think that the book is opened the fight wide from a betting perspective. I think it's come down probably a little bit too much further than what it should have been. I personally think that, look, if Faraz Ziam was sort of maybe plus 140, plus 145, Mike Davis is in and around minus 200, maybe minus 190, I think that's roughly where the fight should be lying. So I think it's come a little bit too far after being open too wide. I'm picking Mike Davis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jasmine Jasudavicius versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Now, Mayra Bueno Silva has had a little bit of a fall from grace, to be honest. She beat Holly Holm. She finished Holly Holm. Of course, it was overturned. But, she had that ninja choke, great victory. Then she had the title fight. And I thought she should have been in a really good position to win that title. But she lost, and then she got knocked out in the fight after that as well by a step down in competition from the fighter that she'd just lost against in Raquel Pennington for the title. So, like I say, it's been a bit of a fall from grace in regards to how high she got and then, where she's gone since then. And maybe she was just in a position that she earned via form and momentum, and, long term, she was never going to be able to hold that position at the top of the division. And maybe that's the case with her. But with Jasmine Jasudavicius on the other side, she's good, man. She's dog-like, she's grindy, she's not the prettiest fighter to watch in regards to her skill set, but man, she can just get the job done. Whether, if she's not got the wrestling and grappling advantages, she can stay on the feet and strike and just potentially use her physical attributes to suffocate her opponents, push her opponents back to the cage and just grind a win out. But more often than not, she does have a wrestling and grappling edge. And then, like I say, she's very physical for the division as well. She's big for the division. The only two fighters that she's lost against in the UFC are to Natalia Silva, who's one of the best in the division, in my opinion, and Tracy Cortez, who is also up there with the best in the division. Everybody else Jasmine Jasudavicius has beaten. Now, with Mayra Bueno Silva, her strongest aspect of a game, in my opinion, is the grappling. But I think the grappling's a little bit of a wash for her in this fight, because if Jasmine Jasudavicius gets her down, I don't think Mayra Bueno Silva catches Jasudavicius with an armbar or a triangle off her back. And if Bueno Silva tries to take Jasudavicius down, I think Jasudavicius is the better wrestler. So if any fighter's going to be on top, I think it's going to be Jasudavicius. I think Mayra Bueno Silva will play guard a little bit, maybe, waste a number of minutes in a couple of rounds, and Jasudavicius just looks to stay on top and stay winning the minutes of the rounds, to the point where I think that Mayra Bueno Silva's path to victory here is probably the striking. Well, like I say, her best aspect of a game is normally the grappling, but here I think that her best route to victory is to keep the fight standing and strike with Jasudavicius and hope to hurt her, because I do think from a striking perspective, Silva's a better striker than Jasudavicius. It's just when Silva gets close and starts landing punches, I think two things. One, Jasudavicius will just get a hold of her and take her down anyway. But two, I think that if Silva punches her way into range, I think that, her natural second nature decision will be to clinch up with Jasudavicius and try and take her down, which again plays into Jasudavicius's game. So I actually think it's a tough fight for Mayra Bueno Silva, because she's got to fight in a way that she's not primarily used to taking fights and trying to win in that way, whereas Jasudavicius, I think she holds all the aces here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jasmine Jasudavicius to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bogdan Grad making his UFC debut against Lucas Alexander. Now, this fight is a straight-up pick'em, but what's interesting here, again, the line movement. I'm going to talk about the line movement again because Bogdan Grad opened up a minus 200 favourite against Lucas Alexander, who the comeback on him was plus 170, but all that money has come in on Lucas Alexander to the point where this is now no longer plus money on any side, especially Lucas Alexander's side. It's a straight even, minus 110, minus 115 pick'em across the board at pretty much like 99% of the books. So, like I say, bad opener. People have bet Lucas Alexander down. I don't think because they think that Lucas Alexander's going to smoke Bogdan Grad. They'll have bet Lucas Alexander just because that was the right side at the right time. The line was off and the betting, inefficiencies in the lines, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. Again, if you are leaning towards the Lucas Alexander side, or even if you lean into, this fight's a coin flip and Alexander, I can get a coin flip at plus 170, that's when you make those bets. So I completely get it. Now, as for how this fight plays out, Lucas Alexander was a fighter that got completely and utterly shit on when he was matched up against Steven Petersen. He was an underdog. I heard some crazy stuff from people, like some mental, I'm not even going to get into it because it was just crazy, but he got shit on ridiculously. Not a UFC caliber fighter, shouldn't be in the octagon, shouldn't be signed for the UFC. He can't do X, Y, and Z, and he's just going to get smoked by everybody in the division, especially Steven Petersen. And bear in mind, taking all that into consideration, I bet on Lucas Alexander, and he absolutely pieced up Steven Petersen. It was one of the nicest, sweetest, easiest plus money cashed bets that I've ever made. Now, from that, he goes into his next fight, and I believe because of that Steven Petersen fight, I'm sure Lucas Alexander was a big favourite. I could be wrong about that. I haven't looked back into the historical betting lines, but Lucas Alexander comes off the back of an absolutely insanely good performance where he destroyed Steven Petersen to get knocked out by Sergei early in round one. Bad knockout, and yeah, like I say, it was just a complete twist of what he'd done the fight before. So now he ends up against Bogdan Grad here, with Bogdan Grad making his UFC debut, and he opens up a big underdog again. So again, I feel like the bookies are really struggling to get a read on Lucas Alexander, which you can understand. Now with Bogdan Grad making his UFC debut, for those that haven't seen him, he looks like he's got a really all-round type of game. Like his striking's very meat and potatoes. He's got some wrestling, he's got some grappling. Like he does mix everything in, and he's a complete mixed martial artist in regards to his skill set. I'm a little underwhelmed though by the work that he actually puts out. Like, I don't think he really tries to take, or he really can get fights by the scruff of the neck at this level and completely run through his opponents, which is a little bit surprising because I kind of feel like he's got the skill set and the style to try and be able to do that against fighters, like, because he can mix in a little bit of everything. He blends everything together quite well. It's just he fights very close to his opponent's level. So I don't expect Bogdan Grad to come into this fight in the UFC and just absolutely whitewash Lucas Alexander. Whereas, the minus 200 line that the bookies opened it up assumed that he would be able to do that to a certain degree. But I think that Bogdan Grad fights too close. He is a little bit give and take. So when he goes, he's good, but then he can be defensively got at, whether that's striking, wrestling, and grappling as well. And I just think that when you're looking at both fighters here, I do expect a really close and competitive fight because Lucas Alexander does have some skill behind him because of what he did to Steven Petersen. Maybe he just got caught against Sergei, who, look, Sergei is a very short, explosive, powerful fighter with the big overhands where he'll leap in from like 2 meters out and look to land that big overhand, and that's essentially what happened with Lucas Alexander. Now, with Bogdan Grad, he's not got that type of style, so I do feel like it is going to be a back and forth style, and you can make an argument for both fighters because of that. Like, Lucas Alexander, when he's got time to work and move, can do a really good job, again, like the Steven Petersen fight. But Bogdan Grad can push a little bit of a pace at times, and if he starts mixing in, some takedown attempts to break up what Lucas Alexander is doing, then that's going to break the flow, and then he can come in with his own shots as well from the takedowns. So I think that, again, you can make a legitimate argument for both fighters. I am, though, going to side with Bogdan Grad here because I just think he mixes it up a little bit better. And if Lucas Alexander starts to run away with the fight or starts to look really good, I think the threat of the pressure wrestling and the threat of the takedowns can potentially just break up what Lucas Alexander's doing and break up momentum in the fight, and then Grad can then slowly start to edge some of the minutes and potentially some of the rounds, and that's the way I'm seeing the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bogdan Grad to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're back with the heavyweights. We've got Hamdi Abdelwahab versus Jamal Pogues. And I'm going to call Hamdi throughout this just so it's a lot easier for me. Now, with Hamdi, he's coming off a 3-year layoff, and it's a really interesting layoff, actually. The first thing, look, he beat Dontel Mays, and after the fight, he was suspended by USADA, and yeah, he was given a suspension. Now, that's factual. The bit that I've read, and you can't quote, I'm not quoting this as fact, I'm telling you what I've read, and it's out there on the internet. I believe it was on Reddit. I don't know how he ended up going down that rabbit hole, but somebody on Reddit said that the day that the suspension of Hamdi's suspension was lifted, he was suspended again with another potentially tainted supplement, I think they said. So he was suspended for a further amount of time on the day that his original suspension was due to be lifted, which is just absolutely crazy. Again, if it's true, that's the part that's not factual. I've not looked to see if there was any, there was any truth in that, just something that I read on Reddit. But obviously, initially he was suspended from USADA after that Dontel Mays fight. So who knows what's going on with this guy and what he's been doing. But he's back after 3 years and he's fighting Jamal Pogues. Now, I'm just really interested to see what version of Hamdi we see, because I actually quite like the style of Hamdi. The issue that you have with Hamdi is, look, he throws bungalows on the feet striking, and he's got a wrestling background, an Olympic level wrestling background as well, which, again, like I mentioned earlier, in the heavyweight division, wrestlers and heavyweights don't go hand in hand from a cardio perspective more often than not. And then when you add in that a guy's just throwing absolute bungalows at his opponents with everything with power and looking to hit him as hard as they can, again, the cardio suffers. Then what effect did he have, if any at all, from the fact that he had something in his body that shouldn't have been there, that USADA found? So there's some question marks with Hamdi in regards to what he's going to look like. Maybe he's worked the last 3 years on cardio and blending things together within MMA, and having a strategy and adapting his style to be more cardio efficient. Maybe that's the case, and he comes out and he shows absolutely no issues from a cardio perspective. But the one thing that I am certain of is he's got an opponent here that is absolutely beatable for him, regardless of how he looks. Like, if he tires out just as much as he tired out in his UFC debut against Dontel Mays, I think that's fine, because Jamal Pogues also slows down. And also with Pogues' weakness within MMA has been off his back. Like, there's a couple of ways you can get at Pogues, but when he has been put on his back, he can struggle. And that's not necessarily a massive knock on Pogues' game, because I've said this time and time again, at heavyweight, if you're on your back with a 265-pound man on top of you, it's just generally going to be difficult standing back up to your feet, because you're huge yourself, you've got a huge man on top of you, and, science. So it's always going to be tough for fighters in the heavyweight division to get back up off the backs, unless they're a little bit of a lighter heavyweight, or they've got like a legit BJJ black belt where they can use that technique to get back up to the feet. So again, I think if Hamdi goes for the wrestling and gets the takedowns, which I think he can and will, then I think Pogues is going to have a tough time getting back up to his feet, because Hamdi does lay heavy on top. The other thing that benefits Hamdi in regards to his wrestling style is his Olympic wrestling style is actually Greco-Roman, which is a lot of the upper body wrestling. So that's not necessarily your single legs and your double legs. He specializes in Greco-Roman, getting your high body locks and getting the fighters down, or getting the opponent down to the mat via the upper body wrestling, which from a cardio perspective is actually a little bit better, especially at heavyweight, because it's the single legs and the double legs where you're having to chain and lift, and that's the heavy cardio expenditure. Whereas the body locks, although it expends cardio, just not as much as the freestyle wrestling, in my opinion. So I think that helps Hamdi, that his style's more Greco-Roman opposed to freestyle. But with Jamal Pogues, he's a fighter that I'm not really high on at all. Like, I spoke about the Steven Petersen fight early on, because Petersen is on this card, and they fought each other. And I think that Petersen was landing back on Pogues as well, and that fight was a little bit closer than what some expected. And I think from Petersen's perspective, the fact that he's predominantly a wrestler and not really known for his striking, and he was doing some good work from a striking perspective, the way Hamdi dealt with Dontel Mays, the way Hamdi dealt with him, like Dontel Mays is a much more explosive fighter and striker than Jamal Pogues, and Hamdi dealt with him from a striking perspective and eventually had to resort back down to his wrestling. But Hamdi did a good job landing on him, and at one point even looked like he hurt Mays as well, which if he's doing that to Mays, I think he's going to be able to do to Pogues. So yeah, look, I actually think this is a good fight for Hamdi Abdel-Wahab. And Hamdi actually opened as the underdog. That this has come down into a pick'em as well, and it seems to have settled there. I'm not sure if it'll go too much further because of the question marks around Hamdi, but I definitely think that, look, more often than not, if you can get the plus money and the pick'em lines against somebody like Jamal Pogues, I think that you're not going to go too far wrong in the UFC at this level. But again, with Hamdi, there's the question marks, which kind of put a bit of a pause on that. So of course, the layoff, the cardio, the potential 2 suspensions from USADA, but at least definitely 1. So yeah, like I say, there's definitely some question marks around Hamdi. And if he had been an active fighter and he'd not been suspended, the likelihood is he's probably got a couple more wins on his record, and this line doesn't look like a -110 pick'em. Yeah, it's tough. There's definitely a risk involved if you're betting Hamdi, but I do think he's the side. So for those reasons, I'm picking Hamdi Abdel-Wahab to win this fight. And the final fight to break down, we've got Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady versus Balaji Oki. Now, Al-Selwady is a fighter that I think disappointed a lot of people when he made his UFC debut against Loic Radzhabov, because I think a lot of people bet Al-Selwady in that fight, even took him as a favourite as well. I was on the other side, I bet Loic Radzhabov, so again I was against the grain there. And to be fair, Al-Selwady was doing a decent job against Radzhabov until it fell off a cliff late in the fight and Loic Radzhabov turned it up and got him out of there. So I think that there's definitely some recency bias in this, because a lot of people were let down by Al-Selwady when they were really confident on him, and now he comes in against Balaji Oki. Now, Balaji Oki, this is a short notice fight, by the way, and it's a short notice fight predominantly on the Balaji Oki side. Like, Al-Selwady was supposed to fight Jordan Levitt pulls out, Oki takes the fight. So it's quite surprising that, look, this fight was open from a betting perspective. Again, I know I'm talking a lot about the betting lines, but it's a betting podcast, I suppose. So, look, from Balaji Oki, he opened up as, this fight was almost a pick'em. I think there was some plus money on the side of Oki at some point, some plus money on the side of Al-Selwady, but it was quite even. But over the last 24, 48 hours, all the money's coming on Oki and really pushed Selwady into a decent underdog. And it's like, I'm a bit surprised, because if the fight with Loic Radzhabov hadn't happened and Al-Selwady took this fight directly after beating George Hardwick as a big underdog on the Contender Series, then I think Al-Selwady looks like a -200 favourite here. But obviously the Loic Radzhabov fight happened. But again, you can not make excuses, but you can talk about certain variables making your UFC debut. Look, Loic Radzhabov's a beast in his own right. He's a heavy hitter. He's got good wrestling. He's physically strong, and he's a problem for anybody fighting. Like, if Loic Radzhabov fights Balaji Oki, man, I'm betting Loic Radzhabov all day long against Balaji Oki. But again, Selwady was doing his job until he didn't, and I suppose that's where the pause comes in. There was a lot of confidence on him beating Loic, which again I've already spoken about, and then the way that he sort of fell off a cliff, maybe people are thinking that the same thing happens again. But I think Al-Selwady was just in his UFC debut, had the UFC debut jitters, but was still doing okay, but just ended up getting bested by a guy that's really skilled in every aspect of MMA. And then with Balaji Oki, like, Oki I've not been overly impressed with to date. Like, of course, he went in against Chris Duncan. He lost that fight early. And then before that, it was the fight with Timmy Kwamba. But Kwamba was fighting an upper weight class, I believe, on short notice. The fight before that was the Contender Series fight against Dylan Salvador. So this is absolutely the best fighter that Balaji Oki's fought in the UFC, in my opinion. I mean, you could argue maybe Chris Duncan is is that best fighter, but, you know, Al-Selwady is a better fighter than the two fighters that Balaji-Oki's beaten under the UFC banner. I actually think it's going to be a really close and competitive fight. But I think the more skilled fighter is Al-Selwady. He's more experienced. I think his wrestling's a little bit better. I think his striking's okay, but can blend the striking into the wrestling better as well. And I just feel overall that Al-Selwady is the slightly better fighter. And although I think it's going to be close and competitive, when you're looking at a fighter to just take the edges in fights, the edges in certain rounds, I think Al-Selwady could definitely edge 2 out of the 3 rounds. Or maybe it's one of these fights where Al-Selwady absolutely wins 1 round, Balaji-Oki absolutely wins 1 round, and then there's a 50-50 toss-up round in between there. And at that point, you know, you're looking at the odds and you're seeing, look, Balaji-Oki's, a slight to moderate favourite, with Selwady as the slight to moderate underdog. Yeah, I think, look, if you're betting this, then it's the side of Al-Selwady. It's just, like I said with Hamdi a minute ago, with Al-Selwady, there is some cause for concern because of what happened last time out, with how quickly he fell off that cliff, and he can't keep doing that. But again, I think Loic Radzhabov was a much tougher fight, and it was his UFC debut as well, so I kind of give Al-Selwady a pass for that. As I've said, I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be competitive, but I like the speed and the mixture of the game that we get from Al-Selwady, where he can revert to that wrestling and grappling. If he's taking someone like Loic Radzhabov down 3 times, I think he can take Balaji-Oki down as well. And then, like I say, I think Selwady just puts things together a little bit better in regards to his overall MMA game. For those reasons, I'm picking Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you every week to everybody that listens. It really does mean a lot. If you listen on one of the podcast platforms, hop onto YouTube if that's what you want to do, for 2 reasons. 1, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free. It costs you absolutely nothing to do that and it helps the channel. And second of all, if you want to have a conversation, it is myself that responds to all the YouTube comments. So tell me where we agree, tell me who you're betting on, tell me if we disagree and why we disagree, and I'll always make the time to get back to everybody that wants a genuine, honest conversation. So yeah, that's all on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. And one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend in Saudi Arabia, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. Our packages are fully inclusive of absolutely everything in regards to the next event subscription, the monthly subscription and the annual subscription. Comes with all your handicapper betting advice, comes with Base AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight on every UFC event, and the prices are super affordable as well. Our ethos here at MMA Play 365 is that we want you to earn your money back that you paid for the subscription as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on your bets. And the way we do that is by having a very affordable price for each subscription. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.